Login accepted. Now initializing.
Hi, I'm Andre Faust, otherwise known as the Tech Guy. Well, welcome to Part 3, the Basics, an Introduction to CSS. What Part 3 is going to deal with is basically using CSS to format. And one of the nice, beautiful things about CSS is that you can apply it to every page. You can create one style and it can go across as many pages as you wish. But before we go, we're just going to do a quick review. In Part 1, we just looked at the very pre-basics. We set up our structure. We demonstrated that you can have structure in your source code. You can send it out to your browser, but there will be no display. It'll be just blank because you haven't put no content. All you've done is that you've defined the structure. And that's it. In Part 2, what we did, we built from Part 1 and we actually created using ipsum Latin text just to create the page, and we put a couple headers in and whatnot. We introduced in Part 2 3 sections: the header, the content, and the footer. Nothing more, nothing less. And we outputted it, and it didn't look all that pretty at all. No, it wasn't. It looks like something that you would see if you wrote an essay or a letter or something on a word processor or something. Now we're going to get into the more intricate part, the more fun part. It'll still be boring, but it'll be a little bit more fun. Now you're going to see a little bit more result. And in this tutorial, I'm going to be covering CSS. I'm going to talk about the element selectors, declarations, values, ID selector, class selector, grouping selectors, just to give you an idea of how this all works, but it's still at the very, very light level. We're also going to look at, inserting comment lines both at the CSS level and the HTML level, and there's just a couple little differences there. In the HTML version, it's going to be / exclamation mark, 2 dashes, a space, your comment. It'll close off with 2 dashes, a less than greater than symbol, and that means that anything you place in between those 2 tags will not show up in your browser. With the CSS, we do the same thing, but it's / astra, your comment, astra / and once again, like with the HTML, whatever you put in between those 2 things will not show up on your browser. And we're going to talk about the 3 ways of inserting CSS into your HTML page. I'm just going to mention all 3, but there's only 2 that I'm going to talk about in the tutorial itself. You have first your external style sheet, which you link to a sheet that's outside of your HTML. You have your internal style sheet, which is in the actual page itself, located in the header section, and then you have the inline. The inline is actually placed inside the HTML element. Once we've completed that, we're going to center our page, because that's always good to know on how to center your page. And that's going to be about it for this part here. Like I say, I try to keep this simple and not give much information all at one time, to allow you to process it, synthesize it, and think it over. So just before we go on, just a little preview for Part 4. In Part 4, I'm going to be introducing the float, and I'm going to talk about the dreaded div class. I'm not going to say any more than that, because I want to keep your curiosity up. So until then, let's roll up our sleeves and get her done.
Well, welcome to Tutorial 3. Tutorial 3 is basically an introduction to CSS, cascading style sheets. Now this first page is where we left off in part 2. Very boring little page. Looks like something that you would have produced in a word processor, like an essay or a letter. Nothing fancy here. We have our titles up top, our main title of the site, our secondary headers, our paragraphs, and a footer. And of course up here that's our header, and I had put in some lines in just to break the pages up. In the actual demonstration that we're going to be doing today, those will be removed. So what we're going to do today is that we're going to go from this boring, mundane little jerk-off page to this, which looks totally different. And the reason why it looks different is because of our style sheets. So we don't need this anymore. We don't need this anymore. So before starting, I'm going to show you this page, and the reason why I'm going to show you this page, because I did do a change from that first boring page to this page here, and the reason was to save myself from doing some inline typing. So what we're going to be looking at is the inline style sheets. I guess that's a good place to start out with. There are two others, external and internal. So what you see here between this span style color red text, it's right up in here, is what's referred to as an internal style sheet. It's actually embedded right in the HTML tag of span, and you can, place these inlines anywheres, and they have their place in the overall scheme of things if you want to do something, specifically for one section. But you're not going to be doing it every time. You might do it once on a page, or twice on a page, or maybe once on a site. The inlines are good for that. So that's the only difference between this page and the page that we left off of in part 2. So let's see what this looks like on the browser. So right here, this red text is one of the inlines that I put in, and what we have here down here is another inline that was put in to get this yellow text. So that's the only difference. And like I said, I did that to save myself some work and to simplify the tutorial, because it would have been distracting for me to have to type those in. So that's the reason why they're there, is the inline style sheets. Also, you'll notice that I have removed the lines, the HR tags from this demonstration. We'll just take a quick look at the source before we move on. And I'm using Chrome as the browser, and I'm using brackets as the editor. So there's our source code, which looks pretty similar to the previous page that we had completed in part 2. So let's go back to our brackets editor. So a little bit more on style sheets. Like I said, you have really 3 types of style sheets that you can use. You can use the external style sheet, which is great if you're using multiple pages and you want to keep your style and your feel the same across all your pages. The external style sheet is the way to go, but for this demonstration I'm not going to be doing too much talking about that. The one that we're going to focus is on the internal, and the reason why is because in this particular demonstration we are only using one page. So if we were using multiple pages, that wouldn't be the best strategy, because you keep having to copy your internal from page to page, and that's not the most efficient way. So to move on, with our cascading style sheet, you have some components. You have your selectors, and a selector has basically three parts to it. It has a declaration, properties, and values, and there are three different types of selectors: element, selector, class, and ID, and we're going to touch on all three of those. Now, the style sheets, what's nice about them is that they do determine the layout and the appearance of the page and the feel of the page. Everything about the page is, is responsible to the style sheet. Remember, the HTML tags, all they did was just describe the data. They didn't do anything as far as a general appearance. And to finish up on this part of the style sheets is that style sheets can be used on multiple pages, and like I say, for our purpose, we're only going to use just the we're using two types. One I've already discussed, and the one that I am starting to discuss, we're going to use the internal style sheet. So the main thing to remember about an internal style sheet is that it has to be placed within the head tag. This is between these two tags of your HTML. And you've got to tell the browser that you are using style sheets. So you've got to type in less than style close. And that's what's nice about brackets is that it automatically closes your tag. As you can see, the forward slash on the second part of the tag. It's good if you're just, as you're writing. It's not good if, if you're trying to do a demonstration and you only want to do one part, because it'll always put the second part. What we're first going to do is that we're going to style our body, because in this tutorial we're also going to center the page. As you notice on the finished product, the page was centered. So I'm going to start out, and right now what we're going to do, we're going to work strictly with the element selectors, and those are your your H1s, your Ps, all your HTML tags are basically your element tags. So starting out with body, we're going to first style our body. Now you have to use your parenthesis when you're defining a cascade selector. So we've got our opening and close brackets, and so what are we going to do? We're going to give this a background color. And this is what I like about brackets, is that you don't have to type everything out. And what color? I don't want it to be dominant, so I'm going to use some pussy little color like honeydew or something like that. Oh, honeydew will do. And isn't that nice? I mean, I just type in a couple words, and it comes up. And you can download brackets from the bracket site, and I'll include the link to where you can download it. So, okay, now we have our body tag, and it's been defined. And that's this tag right here. So now everything that falls in between this opening and closing tag will have this honeydew color, which is almost white. Almost. It may be too close. Let's see what the page looks like. Okay, so I'm going to shrink this down, and I'm going to see if brackets will allow me to do things in real time. Just make sure that we have our page updated. Yep. And I'm going to shrink our text editor. So if we're lucky, some text editors allows me to do this. Some others don't. So, and I'm quite new to brackets, so I don't know what it can and what it can't do. So okay, so we've now identified our style. And like I said, I put it in between the two style. Let's see what happens when I remove this. Control C, and We'll update. And we'll add it back. And you see the page has changed slight color. I'm just going to, just temporarily, I'm just going to do something really wild here and call it blue. And we'll do a refresh. All right, so now you've seen what happened here. It's that whole page has changed colors, but I mean that looks like the shits, right? So we're just going to go back to honeydew, and it's just a slight blue, so it didn't make that much change. But you've seen the effect that once I put in blue, it changed the whole kit and caboodle. So we're going to now move on to our H1 tag, which is for this widget RS. So we're going to go H1. Now remember, we're only working with elements here. We're not working with class or with ID, and we are working with an internal cascading style sheet. So again, close the bracket, and okay, we'll give it color white, color colon white, and semicolon, because you always got to finish off with your semicolon. Now you see it disappeared. I mean it didn't, but if you look real close, now you can see the white, and you can see it contrasting against our body background color. So we've now completed that little puppy. So the next step that we're going to do is that I'm going to do a grouping of two elements on this next one, and it'll make more sense when I get to the actual footer itself. And the reason why is because both the footer and the header are going to have the same properties. So let's type in header, and the header is right here. This is now the tag that the element that we're working on to, and as you can see, it's in between. And I'm just going to scroll down, and here's the footer HTML tag or element, whatever you want to call it. So now that we have that, I'm going to put a comma and footer. Make sure I spell it right. That's the biggest mistake that people run into, is spelling errors. So what are we going to do? Footer. So I'm going to place a comment line right in here. What a comment line does, it allows you to place a comment, but it will not show up on your output, meaning this comment will not show up on the page. So what am I going to call this? Grouping to selectors. And you've got to close your comment lines. So the / astra and the astra /, that's the notation for the style sheet. HTML is a little different, and I'll talk about commenting HTML a little later on. So now I have that in place. So let's get down and put some styles to it. So we're going to put a dark blue color for background. And again, I like that. Dark blue. And you've seen the instant reaction to the web page. And we've got to always remember to put that semicolon to finish off the tag. Now we're going to add a few other things to the header and footer, and it always has to stay within the brackets. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to pretty this up a bit so it'll be visually a little easier to see what I'm doing. Okay, so now you see the opening bracket and the closing bracket. So still staying in, and that's the other mistakes, the common mistake is to write outside of those opening and closing brackets, and that'll give you problems. So I mean, right now, we're looking at, it's not looking the, it's not looking the best. because we're only starting to lay out our styles, our style sheets. I don't know why I'm getting a duplication here. I'll have to figure that out later. Actually, I'm going to figure that out right now, why we're getting a duplication. Okay, the problem isn't with my code. It's somewhere else. It's probably with the browser. So I'm just going to refresh it. Let's see first. Let's save it. And I'll refresh it just to see what's going on here. I know that there's a bug, yeah, that there is a go. So you see there's, it still doesn't look pretty at all. So let's shrink this down a bit and expand this so we can see what we're doing. Now, right now you're noticing that there's this big ugly white gap. I'm going to show you how to get rid of that in a few moments. So what we're going to do now for our combination, I'm just going to pull that up so you can see the two of them side by side. There we go. So these are the two elements that selectors that we've identified, header and footer. So now we're going to add some padding. Padding. I'll just make it padding top. 25 maybe. No, 10. 25 will be a little bit on the overkill. Oops, gotta put our colon in. 10 pixels. And we'll do the same for the bottom. Padding bottom. And you already see how quick the adjustments are. And so that's going to be 10 px. Px stands for pixels. And we close our bracket. When it comes to things like text and whatnot, I will be using the REM. And that's for really, I get into the habit of using it right here now because when I design web pages, I design them to be responsive, even though this demonstration has nothing to do with responsive, except for that we've identified the viewport as a responsive site. But the responsive website tutorial, that'll be for an advance. So now we've got something that's starting to look, somewhat like our finished product. So you've seen how this has affected our appearance. So now we're going to move on to our secondary headers, job specific, the practical, and the widget line. Okay, so those are identified as the H2 element. Once again, as a reminder, we're only working with elements. So you just have to use the HTML element. So H2, open bracket, and so we're going to give it a color red. Color red. And we're going to give it a font family. Font family. Sans serif, meaning that there's no curly things like you'd see in Times Romans. Sans serif. And of white. We're going to give it a font size of 2 M's. font family. Okay, our serifs now kicked in for our secondary headers. 2M, let's check 2M bracket and closing bracket. I'm going to pretty this up again. Okay, so I'm seeing something here that's telling me something's not right. This is again why I like this little editor here. So that's telling me that there's an unmatched bracket here. Let's see if there's anywhere else. Okay, so I can just isolate that problem in that one spot. Okay, so what's our next thing that we're going to do? We're going to make changes to our paragraph. And our paragraph tag is down here. Yeah, there is a problem with on how the live preview works. There is a bug. Let's see how bad it is. Okay, so it's not reading 100% the exact thing that I'm doing. I'm double checking H1 color white, and actually I've already defined it once, so I'm just going to come back here. Do a cut and paste X and keep that all together, and we'll remove that. I'd forgotten that I had originally defined it. Okay, so now on to our P tag. And our P, what are we going to do with our P? Well, we're going to give it a font size. We're going to increase the font size, so FONT. SIZE, and I'm going to give it a 1.2 REM, so 1.2 REM. Now I could get into the theories between pixels, EMs, percentage, REMs, and so on, but that's not the intent of this tutorial. Now, of course, I didn't put my opening and closing bracket. So that goes to show on how important that is. And I'm going to close this off here. Font size 1.2 REM. And I'm using a different keyboard, so it's kind of throwing me off here a bit. I'm not accustomed to this keyboard. So you've seen the changes here. And those lines look to be quite close together. So we're going to do a change there. So we're going to do a line height. And we're going to make that 1.8 REMs. I have height spelt right. Line height. So, okay, so we see now our light is just, there's a time lag. I was expecting, I used Dreamweaver and it does it instantly. But why I didn't use Dreamweaver in this in these demonstrations is that Dreamweaver is a little bit more complicated to it, and it's not something that everybody has access, because you've got to pay Adobe mucho bucks to run to be the proud owner of Dreamweaver, unless you're really going to go professional and make money off of your products. It's best to try to use the free stuff as much as possible. So now remember I set up a span, And we're going to try to pull this up and find one of our spans. Okay, so this was a span that we did on the earlier page. So we're going to be targeting that HTML element. So we're going to come back up to here, and whoops, we don't span. And what are we going to do with that? We're going to give it a color of blue. And already anything that has span into it's been turned blue, as you can see over here. And we'll give it a bold to it. So what we're going to do there, we're going to give it a font weight. And what are we going to give bold? So now it's a little more obvious what we've done. So as you can see, as we're adding HTML, or excuse me, our styles, the page is starting to take changes. And now we're going to do our div tag to give it again. I'm just going to put a color to it, some margins to it. So, and the div tag that I'm referring to is this guy right here, and you can see it's outlined over on this page here. That whole blue square is the dig tag that I'm addressing. So let's proceed. Div, and we'll give it background color light yellow. And close that off. Is there anything else we want to do with that div? Yes, there is. So in that div, we want to give it a margin. Okay, here's the order. You're going to see a set of numbers here. I'm going to have margin 0, 20 pixels, 0, 20 pixels. So imagine a box. The first 0 is the top. The second number could be a 0, but in this case it's a 20. That's the right side of the box. The third number is the bottom of the box. Could be a 0 or a number. And the fourth number could be a 0 or a number represents the the left-hand side of the box. So basically, the number sequence is top, right, bottom, left. It's just a technique that you can use for putting in padding. So let's go on and insert that padding. So rather than having to type in top, padding top, padding right, padding left, padding bottom, this is just a simpler notation. So we said it's going to be 0. We're going to go 20 px, and as you can see how it's already behaving. And oops, don't need that comma. 0, 20 px. And that should complete us. Again, I've got to refresh this because this thing here isn't behaving the way that it should be. So if you look at the bottom here, we've got our padding, and let's scroll up to the top, and we see our paddings there. Now, as you can see, our page, still not centered, right? So we've got to do something to fix that up. And here's how we're going to do it. It's going to be within we're going to do that later with a selector ID, with a selector. We're going to do that later with the an ID selector because we're going to be only using it once in the page. So, okay, I'm going to pretty this back up again because, okay, so now you're seeing that our footer, come here, there wasn't much in our footer. It's not looking cool. You can't even barely see the print. So we're going to again use our element selector, footer, and in our footer we're going to give it a color of yellow. And you've seen it, it changes. And we're going to center our text. Text align. And we see our text is now aligned. So far so good. Things are starting to look, are starting to take shape. I still don't know why that hasn't converted over into sans serif. I'll have to figure that out later. There's probably something small that I've overlooked. It happens. So now we need to center that page, and so we've got to give it a width, and then we've got to center it. So what we're going to do is we're going to create an ID selector, and in the CSS that is shown as pound sign comes before your descriptor. So let's put in our pound sign, which says ID. Identifies it as an ID, content wrapper, and that makes sense to give it. Again, when you're using these names, you want to use names that make sense, right? There's no sense of picking up some really weird, exotic name that when you go to look for it, you can't figure out what it is. So I'm going to put another comment line here. Centers. Page, close off the comment line. Oops. Yeah, it's kind of a real pain trying to get used to another. Now, just that comment line, of course, you don't see anything happening here. I'll just open it up, and that comment line is completely invisible. I'm going to refresh the page again because it just doesn't seem to like. It just doesn't automatically do the updates as we go. Well, there's our homely page from the beginning, and here's where we're at right now. And I still got to figure out what is going on up here because that should have been a sans serif a font. So something's overriding what I put down, but right now I don't know what it is. I'm just going to get rid of this first one because we don't need it anymore. We're there. It'll keep me from getting confused. Okay, so we've now have our content wrapper, so let's do something with it. So we're going to give it a width, which is right now a standard width, and remember, we're not working with responsive websites right now. 24px and closing brackets. So I've given it my width. Width is spelt wrong, I know that. WDTH. Speaking in two languages doesn't help life much either. Okay, so we've now given it a width, but yet, still it's not visible if we, blow this up and we'll refresh. But you do notice that there is a width. It's not before. Before that ran the whole width. Now everything is blocked off into this one chunk, and if you look carefully, you'll see, our yellow showing that div. So, okay, we reduce that, and now we're going to actually put in the component that's going to center that page. So to accomplish the centering, you have to basically tell the margins to be 0. And your height to be auto. And I didn't spell that right because I wasn't looking at the screen. I wasn't even looking at my keyboard. I was looking at some stupid bird outside. Okay, so let's see what's happened now. If the browser picked it up, it did pick it up. Our page is now centered. But look, we've got a problem here. We've got this stupid little white space up top, and we want to get rid of that. So we're going to go back, and just before, I got to tell you why that worked out. Remember, I said that I've already did some pre-work, and I've already put in the selectors in the page. So let's. There's our ID, the content wrapper that I've put in, and that's the one that's that's what's responsible for the centering of the page. And earlier when I identified the div, that's where I got the yellow color, but it's this content. Notice I have it ID, content wrapper. So, okay, where are we at here? Why is it still troubling why that is not? So we have our page centered. So one more thing is that I want to talk about is the class Selector. Okay, so we're going to look at the class Selector, what I'm going to call yellow. Now the class Selector in the CSS style sheet is identified with a period, dot, or whatever you want to call it. Your ID is your pound symbol. Your class Selector is your period. And a class selector you can use as many times as you wish within a page, whereas your ID, it has to be unique to that one page. If not, you will run into problems. So let's give this a name, yellow. And what are we going to do with yellow? We're just going to make a background yellow. Background color yellow. Background color yellow. And you see, I have it in different places. I have it in this one, this first paragraph, and it shows up in the second paragraph, and in this final div down here. And if I would have used ID, I couldn't have done all three. So let's look at the source code here for a moment. And okay, so in this div class, this is where that yellows come from. They give you that final yellow box. And let's see if we can find the other place that and we've used the class yellow in the span. So and we've used it up in this span. So we used it in 3 places. But like I say, if they would have been just ID, you couldn't have done it. So we're just going to wrap up with one last little bit of information here, and that is going to be the HTML comment line. So it's always good to use comments, keep track of what you're doing. So when you're looking at it later, you'll remember, what you were doing. So for HTML, the comment tag is less than, exclamation mark, 2 dashes, space, and here I'm going to put in, this is what centers the page, and put a space in between, 2 dashes, and a greater than symbol. And we save it. We go back to our, I want to do a full page on this. And you see that comment hasn't come up anywhere, but I'm just re-looking at it, and it's a good thing because I forgot all about it. Well, there's still a little bit of fixing up that we have to do before we finish this section off. So how do we get rid of this stupid little white line? So how we're going to do that, we're going to go back to our CSS, and we're going to go into our body tag, and we're just going to add another property or another declaration, and we'll give it margin 0. And you see, once I put that margin 0, it disappeared. Now, there's something that's missing, and it's our H1. We want our H1, this to be centered. So let's center that puppy. And text, whoops, text align center. And there we go, that's all centered, but why is that still not giving me, this is bizarre because that should be telling me, do I have a spelling mistake anywhere? Font family, FONT hyphen F, there's our culprit, spelling error. There we go, that fixed that problem, and you can see we now have our completed version. Well, this is not the most attractive page. What it does is that it gives a good sense of what CSS does, and we've been quite light about it. Again, my approach is to show information in small bits. I spent a little longer on trying to explain the different components. So that was our original that we started with, and our finished product. That's where we started, this is where we end. All the files and everything that you need, of course, will be uploaded into the Dropbox that you will have access. Written notes will be included. So that should give you a pretty good idea on what to do. There is a lot to CSS. I'm not going to be touching near the bulk and the basic parts. All that I'm going to be doing is basically telling you what you need to know. In the next section, part 4, what we're going to start looking at is in floats, and eventually we're going to develop a meaningful site, just not Latin kind of stuff and whatnot. It's going to be mostly, there's an end result that we're going towards, but again, before you can run, you've got to go through the boring steps of first learning how to crawl, walk, and then run. And I hope that I can take you through each one of those sections as painless as possible. I'm not sure if oversimplification is going to work or it isn't. You be the judge of that. Again, any questions that you may have, you can email me. It'll be at the end of the video and in the description of the YouTube. The software that I use for this here is Brackets, and I will supply the link to that site, that if you wish to download brackets, you can. And from what I understand, it can be used. You can download it for any platform, Mac, Linux, or Windows. So till next time, hopefully you've walked away with something. Till then, thanks and God bless.